I get asked for advice on buying watches from you guys all the time, especially when it comes to buying expensive luxury type watches. And for most people, spending thousands of dollars on a timepiece is a major commitment. So I think it's pretty natural to have some uncertainty when you're going into it for the very first time. Now today, I'm putting together a list of tips, like getting the best price, for example, that I've picked up over the last few years. What's up YouTube, I'm Guy, and this video covers my top 7 tips that you should know before buying a luxury watch. Now before we jump into it, I want to hear from all of you down below. So leave a comment letting us know and sharing with everybody the most important things that you've learned when it comes to buying watches since getting into this hobby. The first tip to know before buying an expensive watch, and surprisingly, it's something that a ton of first-time buyers don't realize. This is that the price usually isn't really the price. Very often when buying a new watch from a dealer, you can get a very significant discount depending on the brand and of course the model of the watch that you're looking at. Now it's important to understand the current market, and what's true today is very likely going to change in the months and years ahead. But right now, with the exception of a few specific Rolex models and a few other watches from brands like Patek and AP, you can and you definitely should negotiate for a price that is below the suggested retail price. Most authorized dealers have a markup of around 40% on the watches that they sell. Maybe a little bit more, maybe a little bit less. It depends on the specific brand. But, for example, on a $10,000 watch, the dealer probably paid about $6,000 for it. And basically, that's the window you're working in. Now, obviously, the dealer has to make money, so you're not going to get a 40% discount. But you probably can get between 5 and 20%. I think that's really quite possible on most watches and on most brands. Here's a few rules I'd suggest you follow. First, do some research on the watch that you're interested in and know what a realistic price is. This is going to vary from brand and model, but for example, a few years ago when I bought my Rolex Submariner, a 10% discount was pretty standard, but today that's pretty unlikely. Now, the market that you're shopping in is what you need to know next. If the watch that you want is selling well in your location, the odds are pretty good that you aren't going to get a discount on that watch. Third, buy in cash if you can. This saves the dealer from having to absorb a credit card transaction fee, and they will probably be willing to pass that savings on to you. Fourth, if you have a fair price in mind that you're willing to pay, and the dealer accepts the offer, do not say, okay, let me think about it, and walk away. If you're not ready to buy, I suggest you don't even start talking about price. Now finally, realize that repeat customers usually get better discounts. So don't expect as much for the first time buyer. But if you're a second or third time buyer from this particular dealer, maybe push for a little bit more than you might think is fair. Tip number 2, do not forget about servicing the watch. A lot of guys don't realize that whether it's an affordable or an expensive watch, it does need to be serviced, probably several times over the course of its life. This has a lot to do with why I am really no longer hoarding up a large collection of inexpensive watches, because sometimes the service cost can be as much or more than what I paid for the watch. Now, on more expensive watches, basically, it makes sense to service and maintain it when needed. These watches will last a lifetime if they're well cared for, after all. But keep in mind that about every 5 to 7 years, or maybe if you're lucky 10 years, the watch will probably need servicing. Yes, eventually it will need to be done, and service costs on luxury watches can easily cost $500 or more, so it's a really good idea to inquire about the cost before you purchase and factor that cost into the cost of ownership. More complicated watches tend to be more expensive to service, as do higher end, more expensive watches. Another option is to locate and get to know a local watchmaker that you think you can trust. The reason being that they might be a bit more affordable and probably more readily available. Because often when you send a watch into the manufacturer for service, you'll have to wait months before you get it back. Yeah, that's right. Sending a watch off for service is not only extremely expensive, but often very time consuming. And it's something that people don't account for when they're getting into this hobby. A 1-month turnaround time is probably on the faster side for some brands, and I've known people that have waited up to 3 months in some cases. My third tip, and it's a little thing. It's something that people don't think about, and it's not to forget about insurance. Whether you use your homeowner's insurance policy to cover an expensive watch or maybe a specialized insurer like Jewelers Mutual, I think it's a good idea to have your expensive timepieces covered. The annual cost will be a fraction of the value of what the watch is worth, but being covered for damage or theft is, in my opinion, highly recommended, and it's something that people sometimes just forget to do. I got an email from a viewer a while back who bought a brand new Rolex Sea Dweller, and I think he had only owned it for a few days, and he had an accident, and it got some pretty significant damage. So, it wasn't covered by insurance, and it cost him almost $1,000 to get it repaired. Now, a 15-minute phone call and $100 a year could have made that accident sting a whole lot less. The bottom line is, if the watch represents an important amount of money to you, you should definitely have it covered. Losing a $200 watch might ruin your day. A $2,000 watch might ruin your month. But I don't know about anyone else, a total loss on a watch that's worth $10,000 or more is probably going to ruin my year. Tip number 4, what is the gray market and should you use it? A lot of people, especially first-time buyers, don't know what gray market dealers are, so let's get started there. Gray market watch dealers sell watches new and unworn, usually complete with the box and all of the original papers, but they aren't authorized by the brand to sell their products. What that means is that the dealer doesn't acquire the watches that they sell through an authorized distribution chain. If they're a bigger gray market dealer who sells a large volume of watches, most of their inventory probably comes from authorized dealers who are looking to offload their own inventory because that dealer needs to recoup the capital to purchase new inventory of their own. So an authorized dealer buys from the brand, and a gray market dealer buys from them. They sell their unsold inventory to gray market dealers, typically at a steep discount, and then the gray market dealer sells to the end user. Now, is this a problem? No, not usually. The watches that they sell are typically brand new and authentic, and their prices tend to be a little bit lower than the authorized dealer. However, some brands won't honor the warranty if the watch was purchased from a gray market dealer. And some gray market dealers can't or won't provide the buyer with the warranty cards or paperwork. So, if your watch needs repair that would otherwise be covered by the warranty, you might be paying for that out of pocket if it were purchased from a gray market dealer. That said, if you buy a watch from a gray market and you can save more money than the cost of the watch's service or repair, it might be worth it. For example, let's say you can buy a $2,000 watch for $1,000 from the gray market, and you know that a full service on that watch is going to cost $750. You're $250 ahead, even if the watch does break and you have to pay for repair out of pocket. But if it doesn't break at all, you're basically $1,000 ahead. So sometimes it does make sense to go with a gray market dealer watch. On tip number 5, I'm going to briefly talk about vintage watches. Vintage watches can be really cool. They can be rarer than your typical brand new watch, and sometimes they're more unique than the standard run-of-the-mill current production watches that you see in every single store window. Some guys really like the character of these watches, and they like the thrill of hunting down a watch that they want in the condition that they're looking for. But as a first-time buyer, I would suggest either avoiding the vintage watch market until you really know what you're doing, or finding someone with a great deal of experience to guide you along the way. It's really easy to get in over your head when dealing with vintage watches. Their service histories will often be a mystery, meaning you won't know if any of the parts are original, and they tend to be a lot more delicate. So if you are looking for a watch that's going to be a daily wear watch, it can often be not the appropriate choice. That said, if you want to spend the time to get educated on vintage watches or build a relationship with a dealer or a fellow collector who can help you along the way, buying something like a birth year watch or something that's vintage and has that, I don't know, retro appeal, something that a modern watch just doesn't quite have, it could be a lot of fun, but definitely tread carefully. Tip number 6 is the elephant in the room. It is retained value. A lot of collectors and watch channels here on YouTube are far more concerned about the retained and resale value than they are about any other aspect of a watch. And look, I'm not going to say that they're wrong for caring about that. I get it. When you are about to spend thousands of dollars, knowing what your asset might be worth if the day comes that you need to sell it does of course have merit. But my suggestion is to not get too caught up in that and try to just enjoy the watch for what it is. Quote unquote, investing in watches is tricky business, and by and large, my opinion is that watches aren't good investments. Really, they're not. Yes, a handful of specific watch models do hold their value well, some even do increase in value, but those are the exceptions and they're certainly not the rule. And even if you have purchased one of those quote-unquote investment pieces, there's a good chance that you're not going to see the full potential of their gains if you decide to sell it. So here's the thing. To sell a watch at an appreciable profit, a perfect storm of circumstances has to happen. First, it has to be one of those handful of hot models. Next, you have to buy it at a good price. After that, you really can't wear it, and you have to keep it in mint condition. Finally, you have to sell it. And if you're not someone who has a known watch dealer reputation, you're never going to get top dollar for it. Now, just because someone like David S.W. can sell a Daytona for $25,000 doesn't mean you can. He has spent years building the reputation that he has as a reliable and trusted watch dealer, and you haven't. That said, yes, anyone that can get their hands on a Daytona for retail price can make money on it. But what about something more realistic? Let's say you bought a Rolex Submariner for the current retail price of $8,950. Let's say you wear that watch for about a year and you put the typical amount of wear and tear on it, and then you go to sell it. Well, if we go to Chrono24's website and look at that, they're selling for as much as $11,000. Hot damn, that's a $2,000 profit. Except, it's not really. First, those are asking prices, not sold prices. Second, those are again watch dealers with a history and a reputation selling a watch that is very likely new, and people aren't very likely to give you the same price as some random unknown individual selling a used watch. Now in reality, if we go to eBay and if we look at recent sold listings of similar watches, we can see a whole bunch that have sold for between $6,000 and $8,000, which represents a loss of as much as $3,000. Oh, and don't forget the 12% fee that you have to pay eBay and PayPal at the end of the transaction. So yeah, don't worry so much about retained value. It's sure good to know what you might expect to get if you do ever sell the watch, but you have to be realistic about it. You probably are not going to get top dollar. If you can get $7,500 for a used Rolex Submariner, you're doing okay. And losing $1,500 isn't exactly a good investment. Tip number 7, the final tip for today's video, is to beware of fakes. There's a lot of fake watches out there, especially fake Rolex watches, and they are pretty hard to tell apart from the real deal authentic watch. If you're buying used watches or watches outside of the authorized dealer network, you're taking a risk, and depending on the amount of money involved, it might be a very big risk. So before you make that kind of purchase, I'd make sure that you have some avenue to have the watch authenticated before making the purchase. If you have a dealer or a watchmaker in your area, call or visit them. Ask them if they can authenticate a watch that you're thinking about buying. A lot of dealers will provide an insurance appraisal for a fee, and I assume part of the appraisal process would be to inspect the watch for authenticity. Inquire about the services that might be available in your area before you spend the money. Next, if you can, stick to buying from known and trusted dealers. That isn't foolproof, but the better the reputation of the dealer, the safer you probably will be. The old saying is that you buy the seller, not the watch. So spend some time looking up reviews and complaints about any seller prior to making that transaction. If you are going to buy from an individual that's just selling a used watch, of course, the risks go up substantially. Now, I'm not going to tell you what you should do here, but I'll tell you what I would do personally. I really don't think that I would ever do this, not for the amounts of money that we're talking about. Saving something like 20% to buy a used watch from an unverified source just isn't worth the risk to me. But again, I leave that decision to you and to your best judgment. Just remember that if a deal seems too good to be true, it probably is. All right, guys, I'll wrap up today's video covering my 7 tips that you should know before buying a luxury watch. As always, thanks for tuning in. I do greatly appreciate it. If you're new to the channel and you enjoyed this video, please do subscribe. If you've been here for a while, check the links in the description of this video for ways that you can help me out and support what I'm doing here on YouTube, including using my Amazon affiliate links to buy products that I've reviewed or anything else for that matter. I do get a small commission with each transaction, and those commissions add up. So a big thank you to everyone that's been using that link. And with that said, I'm gonna wrap this one up, sign off, and say bye now.